This podcast is a member of the Red 5 Network. For more Red 5 Network podcasts and content creators, visit bio.link/Red5.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast. Come to you, as always, from deep within the Outer Rim, far beyond the watchful eyes of the Galactic Empire. My name is John Marktali, and joining me, as always, is...
Garrett K. Jones. How you guys doing out there in the galaxy?
Far, far away.
Yes.
All right. Well, I am doing just fine here in this part of the galaxy. So today we are going to be talking about a little bit about the expanded universe, but not the expanded universe, the new expanded universe, what is now referred to as Legends continuity.
As far as I'm concerned, it's still canon.
Well, we can talk about that. Because I think there are a lot of people that, and I've said this before, those books were really what helped bring me back into the fandom.
Really?
At a new level. Like, I always was a fan of Star Wars. I always enjoyed watching the movies, but reading particularly the Timothy Zahn novels, the original Tron trilogy, that's what took me from being just, I guess you could just say, a casual fan into a fanatic, where I had to know everything about these ships. I needed to know everything about these planets, everything about these characters. Those books took me to that next level of fandom. And from there, I just want to read more and more and more and more and more and more. So, I mean, what about you? What was kind of your intro into the expanded universe?
So my intro into the expanded universe, actually, I was in middle school when I got a copy of it's the second book in the Thrawn trilogy, Dark Force Rising. And I read through it. My local library actually had an audio copy on, at the time, cassette, because CD wasn't a thing. Yeah. Or it was. You didn't start having audiobooks on CD. And so I listened through it while I was reading it. And it always stuck with me because I thought it was such a great book. The idea of Joris Sabaoth and the dreadnoughts coming back into play, and the clones being like, they find stormtroopers that are just all clones, and it was really mind-boggling. Yeah. I thought it was a great book, and I loved it. And then as I got into high school, I had some friends who were they were into RPGs, and they played a mix of Dungeons and Dragons. Like, they would kind of balance it out. They'd do some D&D campaigns, and then they would do a campaign of Star Wars. And so I got in with them mainly to play the Star Wars stuff, and I really, really enjoyed it because it was part of that world, because it was like the way that the RPG was set at the time. It was set kind of within the scope of the trilogy, maybe just a little bit post-trilogy, kind of what we see in The Mandalorian, as far as that era. But so the campaign that we played recognized a post-Imperial, but or kind of in the midst of it. So it was because we had our game master had a character who was supposedly Palpatine's grandson, who was like this 13-year-old little imp who just ran around torturing people with force lightning and just messing with people, more like a gremlin than anything else.
Nice.
So I created a series of characters off of that, and which led to my own, writing my own fan fiction. But graphic novels from Dark Horse were big. They were really starting to launch in the 1990s. I read a lot of those. But the first Star Wars graphic novel I bought, which I shared with you just a few months ago when I was talking about my favorite graphic novel titles was Shadows of the Empire, which is the story that's set between the events of Empire Strikes Back and The Return of the Jedi. And I love that story because it explains a few things that are left unexplained in the two stories. Like it explains why Chewbacca's hair looks a little different at the start of Return of the Jedi as it did compared to the end of Empire Strikes Back. It explains why Leia has the Bouche costume. It explains why Luke has the new lightsaber and what he's been doing in the time in between. And it actually gives a lot more time to Boba Fett, because in the midst of all this, Boba Fett is actually in the process of trying to get Han Solo's carbonite prison from Cloud City to Jabba the Hutt on Tatooine. And in the midst of that, Prince Shizor, who is the new villain for the story, is trying to route that so that it doesn't get there the way it's supposed to, thus putting Vader on the outs with both the Emperor and the Hutts and creating a whole mess of chaos. And so...
Go ahead.
I was just saying, so that drew me in. I like those kinds of expansions.
Yeah.
And, and I mean, I grew up playing the TIE Fighter flight simulator game.
Oh, yes. Yeah, X-Wing. Yeah, I did too. I think I had most of them. I had X-Wing versus X-Wing TIE Fighter, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, X-Wing Alliance. They're all just great. It's interesting because my first time reading Heir to the Empire was in audiobook form.
Oh, really?
And it was because I remember I had the abridged form. I didn't get the it wasn't able to read the unabridged until sometime later, but it was narrated and read by Dennis Lawson.
Oh, that's cool.
aka Wedge Antilles himself.
Who is related to Obi-Wan actor?
Yes,
Ewan McGregor.
He's uncle. He's his uncle.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's it was so. You know what I always thought was a book when you talk about those early EU books, one that kind of gets overlooked, I think, but I think is really, really good, was Truce at Makura.
I don't think I'm familiar with that one.
Truce at Makura. So the setup is it takes place immediately after Endor. Like Endor has just ended. What's left of the Imperial fleet has fled, and they're doing mop-up operations, and they get a distress call from an Imperial world on the edge of kind of the border between the unknown regions and the kind of mid-rim, outer rim, that kind of area, that they're being attacked by an unknown race.
Gotcha.
And it's Imperial world, so they go there and they have to form an alliance with this Imperial. It was still Imperial, and they're being attacked by this race called the Saruki.
Oh, Sriruvi.
Sriruvi.
Yeah. Okay. See, because when I got into the role playing game, like I got the rule book and all the primer stuff, and then there were a couple of other texts that were being put out by Del Rey as companion pieces, and one was weapons and technology, and then there was ships and vehicles, or vessels and vehicles.
Yeah, but it was so interesting because, like, the way they explain their technology is kind of like they look like, if you want to go into a Star Trek, they look like the Gorn, but their technology is almost very Borgish.
Yeah,
like, they connect you, and they're draining the life force of these people, the races that they capture to power their ships. And it was just like the way they explained it was just like horrific, but at the same time so fascinating. And I kept waiting for this. Like, it ends, and you never hear from this race again.
Yeah,
like, and I'm just like, bring them. I kept waiting for them to bring them back. And even well, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think what makes the expanded universe of the Legends expanded universe so popular amongst fans is because, one, it puts them in. Most of the people who are reading those books were people who grew up on the films.
Yeah.
And wanted to see that expansion, to see the expansion of the lore. 2, you have people who are getting into the series for the first time because they may not like the movies, but the books speak to them in a different way.
Yeah.
But what was cool is you got to continue on these stories with characters you knew and characters you loved, and that's what made them so timeless and so classic.
Yeah.
And while it is from a writing perspective, it is adventurous to kind of change that and look for new heroes that you can incorporate.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes problematic when you use that character as a means of just replacing someone who's already been established. And a really good example of expanding the lore that I think has done well has been in video games to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
So prior to the new trilogy coming out back in the early to mid 2000s, mid to late 2000s, you had the Force Unleashed games.
Yeah.
The first one was epic because you had these sweeping landscapes. The cinematics were amazing. You had Sam Witwer, who went on to voice Darth Maul through the Clone Wars and Rebels, playing the Starkiller. So they reused that Starkiller moniker that originally was for Anakin. And he was Vader's secret apprentice. And it was so cool to kind of see behind the scenes of what goes on in the Empire, especially the dynamic between Palpatine and Vader. And like the very first, what was really cool about it was when you start the campaign fresh, and you can only do it when you start a brand new game save, was the prologue. You get to play as Vader.
Mm-hmm. And
that was so cool because like Vader is so strong in the Force that like you could basically spam any one of his Force abilities and it would barely take down any of his Force ability in the like the meter on the game. And it was really cool. But the gameplay, the story was really well written. Lucas was behind it. You could see his fingerprints on it. And it really was immersive. The only way that the series has gotten more immersive has been with the Jedi Fallen Order series.
Yeah.
That game, I was really, really iffy about it because it was put out by EA. And usually EA likes to nickel and dime their customers on just about everything. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of DLC that really expands like any of the gameplay, but there's enough to keep you interested to play the game. And the really cool thing about it is that you get to really personalize the lightsaber. So like in the Force Unleashed, really the only thing you got to do was change the color of the blade. When you get to Force Unleashed 2, you get to change the color of the blade, but you also get to make some changes that tweak how you use the Force with your lightsaber. This game, it's just mostly aesthetics, which is fine, but the aesthetics are really, I mean, there's a lot of variations and permutations that you can do.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
But I thought that was a really neat way of drawing in younger generations who were not familiar with the EU at the time and bringing them in.
Well, so now that we've talked a little bit about like what we all love about the EU, and I think we can both say that we really do love the old, the legends, if you want to call it that. Let's take a few minutes and talk about maybe some of the downfalls, some of the pitfalls. One thing I want to talk about is one thing that's brought up a lot, which is God tier Luke. That Luke became too powerful in the EU.
Now I'm having to look this up because this is not something I am familiar with.
That he became so like overpowered with the Force that that's just one. I mean,
Okay. Yeah, I'm seeing what you're talking about. Where like he became so steeped in Force powers and his strength in the Force. I never really encountered that in those books. Because a lot of the books that I read, like there was a series that was put out about 10, 15 years ago that I got into, where Luke and Ben are in exile from Coruscant. They have their own thing. They haven't really established a new Jedi Order yet. And so I was following those books for a spell. And they were really good. But I never encountered anything that showed that level of ability. But I mean, think about it though. Whether it's a Jedi or a Sith, I don't think it was really a pitfall. Because I mean, look at how powerful Palpatine was.
Yeah, that's true. That's
the ability to be in a room full of Jedi and use just enough Force ability to do what he needed to do and still hide who he was.
Yeah.
They knew that there's a Dark Force user somewhere nearby. They just couldn't pinpoint.
Yeah. For me, I think there's two things that I think when I think of why I stopped reading the books.
Okay.
The big one is using Vong. I think you end up having a villain or a group of villains that was too overpowered. And the books just became too bogged down, for me at least. And you had an enemy that seemed to be undefeated, didn't seem to be able to be defeated. And they almost needed it's been so long since I've read the books, but they almost needed a Deus Ex Machina to overcome it. Like they just kind of like, they can't beat them. Then suddenly, we can beat them now. After doing destroyed everything. And also, I think you also had the issue with when you set the books up to be canon almost from the start. And then you start having the new movies come out. You start having the prequels come out. And you start having things that contradicted what happened in the books. And you have to retcon the books. So you started having things that would constantly contradict itself within the books. And you didn't have I think that's one thing that we can talk about what Disney has done and not done. But they've at least set up a sandbox with set rules for the authors to work off of, to know that and the fact that they're working within Disney and within Lucasfilm, they kind of have a guideline of where to go and what to do. So you don't have one author running this one and then the next author might have just skimmed over the book and write something else that completely contradicts what the other author already said.
And you make a valid point there, because by the time that the prequel started coming out, 24 years ago now.
I know.
It's that long. In having that pop up, you run the risk of having so much material to work from that it's really easy to gloss over and completely forget what may have been established. Because the way that Lucas was running everything, every story arc had to have his approval to fit in with the canon. And then when he wrote the prequels, nothing fit in with the canon at that point. The problem that I run into looking at the current EU under Disney's ownership is the fact that Disney will bring in authors that are not fans of the franchise or the saga, and they will write their own spin on it. So case in point, just a few weeks ago, or maybe close to a month ago, I was listening to the audiobook for the bridging novel Star Wars Jedi, and it's called I'm going to kill myself because I'm having to look it up right now. I'm looking at my Audible library, and it is called Star Wars Jedi Battle Scars. And it's supposed to be this bridging novel in between the events of Fallen Order and the new game that's supposed to come out in just a couple days, Survivor. And it follows the same cast of characters, but the author that wrote it, Sam Maggs, she goes out of her way to establish more than 2/3 of the story being focused on a side character who was introduced later in the first game, at making her the forefront. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but the focus wasn't on dealing with the Imperials and dealing with the main mission of the story. Right. It was her getting involved in a same gender physical relationship with this Imperial defector. And it took up the majority of the story. And I'm like, this is really unnecessary.
Right.
And the problem is the author uses whatever opportunity she gets to work that in, because that's part of her identity. And it feels very much like what Kathleen Kennedy did with Rey, where you're injecting yourself into the story, right, and making creative decisions that don't strengthen the story or move the story along. It just bogs it down with all this unnecessary stuff.
Yeah.
And so that becomes problematic for me, is when you have people who are not fans or are not as steeped in the lore, just writing whatever they want because it might suit some, current day social politics agenda, but it doesn't necessarily satisfy the fans, because I've looked at people who are reading through the same book right now and they're not all that thrilled with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we're kind of, getting ready to kind of wrap things up here, is there any what are some of the stories? Because it seems like one thing they are doing is I don't want to use the term, and I guess you could use the term cherry picking. They're especially Dave Filoni, especially, is going through and taking out stories and characters from the EU and kind of fitting them in. A good example is Thrawn.
Right.
And I love the fact that he's actually using Timothy Zahn.
He's using that as a basis.
Well, he's also using him, actually contacting the author and working with the author to make sure that the character, he did this when he brought Thrawn into Rebels. He worked with Zahn personally, had him on set as a consultant to make sure that they got the character right.
Well, that's awesome.
Which I thought was just really cool. And they're doing this again, I guess, with the Ahsoka series of making sure that they get the character right, that they're, because he was such an iconic character in the old EU.
Yes.
And it looks like they're really, with the Ahsoka series, it looks like they're doing their own spin on Heir to the Empire,
which I think could be really cool.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping it's done right, because, the shows have been kind of hit and miss. I mean, the strongest entry obviously has been Andor so far. Yeah. And the first season, I think the first season or two of Mandalorian, but we've had some deviations that in the storytelling that just kind of lose their way. Yeah. To put a pun on the Mandalorian axiom, but I'm hoping it goes well. Filoni, for the most part, has been doing a great job of respecting what has come before.
Yeah, which makes sense knowing his background.
Yeah,
that he pretty much was the Padawan of George Lucas,
right? And
literally,
and he was actually being set up to kind of, again, using expanded universe terms. He was the heir apparent for George Lucas until Disney got their hands on everything and decided to go with Kathleen Kennedy instead.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a shame, but at the same time, it has freed him up to do a little bit more creative stuff than, being the chief, where he's having to do all the administrative stuff. It's like being the admiral. You don't get to really fly in the chair, captain, to cross franchises over to Star Trek. But I do have a recommendation though. Especially if you're a fan of the Clone Wars series, if you can get your hands on copies of the Clone Wars graphic novels put out by Dark Horse, they are amazing, amazing stories. And the reason being is because they introduce you to characters, other Jedi characters, other facets within the Clone Wars that are only barely touched on. Like Quinlan Vos has a huge story arc in the books, and you get to see him, dance that fine line between, is he a dark sider or is he a light sider? Is he a Jedi? Is he a Sith? And all the things that come in between. You get to see a little bit more of Mace Windu and get some of his background and how he operates, which is really, really cool stuff. Talking about how he developed that seventh form of lightsaber combat, Vapad. You get introduced to Ashered Het, who is a Jedi who was raised by the Sand People. And he makes for a really, really cool character because there's a dynamic between him and Anakin. And Anakin's still a Padawan dealing with the repercussions of what happened with the Sand People on Tatooine. So I highly recommend getting a chance to read those books. They are just epic.
Yeah, definitely.
Any recommendations that you have besides the Thrawn trilogy? Because that should be like required reading.
Yeah, I honestly, even though they might be, I don't know if they might be considered kind of young adult, but they're definitely more shorter novels. The X-Wing series is really good.
Yes,
I love the X-Wing series. There's more. There's like several books in it, but very, very good. Really giving, and I love the fact that the Legends continuity did give a lot of love to these kind of minor characters, like Wedge. Bossk Falea was another one that, like a good. I wouldn't call him a full villain, but a good foil, political foil for like Leia and Mon Mothma. So I definitely would do those. One thing I did like that, in hindsight, looking back at it, that the Disney canon has done that I actually think was better, was how they dealt with the fall of the Empire. In a sense of, well, like, because from what we see of Palpatine throughout the the expanded universe and everything like that, what we see of him, so far, I can see him reacting to the fall of the Empire the way he did in the new canon with Operation Cinder, with this idea of, if you can't, an empire that can't keep its emperor alive does not deserve to exist. So I can see him having that mentality of, if I die, everything dies, and destroying everything and then taking what's left and going out into the unknown regions and kind of rebuilding from there.
Yeah.
Other than it being just kind of like out there, and I can also see the New Republic having the same mindset it has in the new canon, where people like Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, who came from the Old Republic when there was no military, having that mindset of, well, the war's over, we can disassemble all this now. We don't need this now. So I can see those two mindsets from both of those people. Makes a lot more sense. Not that I didn't like, the old stories, obviously I did, but I think this makes a more realistic sense for how these two characters would react to what happened.
It'll really be interesting to see. I'm really curious to see how the lore will pick up from there. As I said last week, I'm not all that thrilled about the new movie with Rey.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a unnecessary project, but anything that expands the lore and does it well, I will appreciate. Rogue One was one of those examples. And despite the fact that Solo had some pitfalls in it, in the way it was handled, how it's very rocky start in production. I actually enjoyed it. It's got a decent enough story. I mean, a lot of things are really contrived, like, oh, your last name is now Solo because you're by yourself.
Yeah.
Lame. I can come up with a better backstory than that. And I have. But yeah, the EU is always going to hold a very special place in my heart. I mean, you can see my shelf back here. I mean, the top row is the bulk of it is Star Wars to some extent. There's a lot of Batman off I'm pointing this way, off to the left over here. But for the most part, midway across that first row is nothing but Star Wars, and it's mostly Clone Wars and Star Wars Legends or Star Wars Legacy, which deals with, it's like 150 years after the Battle of Yavin and deals with Luke's great-great-grandson, Cade.
Yes, Cade Skywalker.
That is definitely another recommendation for reading if you're into graphic novels.
Well, all right. Well, as we wrap things up, why don't you tell the people out there, Garrett, where they can find you at?
Yeah. Well, you guys can find me on a couple of different platforms. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at GKJ_publishing, where I post about my book series, The Archives of Sync Ran. And you guys can find me on my website, archivesofthefivekingdoms.com. I'm also on YouTube. I have a show called The Right Way. My channel is called GKJ Publishing. Go figure. And I'm finishing up a marathon of author interviews. This week, I'm going to be interviewing a fantasy author named Jacob Lantham. And then next week, bring back my top 10 book recommendations with an all-new Star Wars themed episode featuring our former co-host Will, aka Darth Tuba. It's going to be very Star Wars centric, from the opening crawl that I'm doing it as my intro to the Jedi actual bathrobe that I will be wearing because I don't have an actual Jedi robe, and lightsaber. So I hope you guys will enjoy that when that launches on Revenge of the Sixth.
Awesome. As for us right here, of course, if you want to get hold of us, the best way to do that is through our email. That is warofthestars1@gmail.com. That is also our Twitter handle. All other socials, you can find us, just search War of the Stars. If you want to check us out on our podcast, which obviously if you are listening to us, we are wherever fine podcasts are heard. Again, just search War of the Stars, especially on Spotify. Remember to give us a 5-star review there on an Apple Podcast also. Check out our other show, or my other show, Star Wars Through the Eyes of a Child. We just uploaded our newest episode where we watched Downfall of a Droid with my daughter Lily. It was a lot. That was a lot of fun.
That was a fun episode.
That was a really good episode. If you want to support the show, patreon.com/War of the Stars, or go to our Spreadshirt shop. Also, if you are going to be in the Indianapolis area on May 6th, Revenge of the Sixth, we will be, myself and Lily, my daughter, will be at the Indiana Comic-Con that day. We're going to be checking that out. Should be a lot of fun. So if you're going to be in the Indianapolis area, and are going to be attending that con, just look for a little 8-year-old girl dressed as the cutest little Darth Vader you've ever seen, and come say hi. We'd love to see you and have a chat.
Walks up to some random 8-year-old wearing a Darth Vader costume. It's not you and your daughter. Hey, I listened to your podcast. What? Go away.
Who are you?
We're from Canada.
No offense to our Canadian fans out there.
Nope, none at all. All right, guys, that's it for us. As always, this is not just our Star Wars. It's not just your Star Wars, or it's not mine and John's. This is our Star Wars. God, man, I just butchered that. Yeah, it's our Star Wars.
Yeah, it's our Star Wars. Well, with that being said, may the force be with you. Goodbye, everybody. This is the way indeed.